So
Yep.
what we wanted to do with this episode is have another one of the "Who the hell is" episodes,
Right.
and those are getting some decent views, and we're starting to get some really hopeful comments,
That's cool.
and so this. What we're going to do is we're going to put some of this on YouTube, and then but
Uh-huh.
the full one will be on the full episode will be on our Patreon. So if you are so inclined and you like this content, then just move on over to Patreon and consider signing up. And there's content on there now, and we're getting ready to add a whole lot more content as we
Yep.
continue to build that out. And we are so thankful for our current Patreon subscribers.
Yes, we
And,
are.
Samuel Anderson is the most recent one who signed up
Hey,
for us. Now,
Samuel.
yeah, now look, let me tell you about Brother Samuel, okay? Brother Samuel. He has been making comments for a long time. He's one of the original commenters on YouTube,
Well, sweet.
and always has something positive to say, and he so I really enjoy engaging with him. He's let me know some things that's going on in his life. He had a baby here a while back, and
Oh,
just
congratulations, man.
started a business, cool stuff, right?
Yeah.
So he's one of those guys that I keep telling him, hey, if you hear something that you don't like, tell us that too. We want to know. I trust you.
Right.
You've been aboard for a while now, but he signed up for our Night Terrors tier level Patreon subscriber, and we are so
Oh.
happy so he should have his T-shirt. If he's not got it, he should have it real soon. And I sent him his swag package out, so he's got the stickers, the signed art, and all that kind of stuff.
Cool.
So, getting into this episode, I was thinking about it today, and I asked you. I said, "Who would you want to do next?" In the "Who the Hell Is" series, and you said Ivan.
Well,
And
Ivan is, I think, from the beginning, Ivan has so much mystery surrounding him, almost as much as Lafayette.
yeah, and as Nevermore Hollows has progressed into getting deeper into the lore, and we're building the mythos and all that and stuff.
Hmm.
You notice I started putting them together, and then you started helping. Well,
Yeah.
flesh that out. What's that mean? What's that mean? Because I know Lafayette's story. I know it,
Yep.
right? And because he's in the center of everything. When we first see Ivan saved the boys in trailer 66,
Right.
right? That's the first time we saw Ivan. And he was just going to be a throwaway character. I had no plans for Ivan. Okay.
Hmm.
In fact, I had to come. I'll tell you this. So again, this series is all about character development. How do we come up
Right.
with these
Right.
characters? So when I was trying to think of his name, I was just going to call him Ivan. Just Ivan. He was just some Russian guy that didn't really sound Russian, but he looked classical Russian,
Hmm.
and I was like, and then I thought, well, no, he needs a last name as I was writing the story. And the story was done, and I kept thinking, I need to give him a full name. I need to,
Right.
because I just said Ivan the custodian, and I was like, before I record this and publish it, I want him to have a name, and still throwaway character. Wasn't going to do anything else with him. Maybe mention him occasionally that he was, the custodian if I was playing around in Pink Flamingos, right?
Yeah.
And I came upon Ivan Ivanovich, and I was like, man, how I came upon that was I was like, what? He's basically a John Doe. That's what I thought. He's a
Yeah.
live John Doe. He's just a throwaway character. Nobody knows who he really is. And then that stuck. I was like, wait a minute. If nobody knows who he is, so I Googled how to John Doe in Russian, right? And in
Right.
Russia, according to the Google machine at the time, if they had a dead body that they couldn't identify, instead of calling it John Doe, they call it Ivan Ivanovich.
That's awesome.
And when I put that when I read that, and then I read that he was going to be my John Doe anyway, and something just clicked, and I went, no, we need this character in Nevermore Hollows. And then I saw how the boys just related to him in trailer 66. They
Yeah.
trusted him.
Yep.
And I thought, well, why do they trust him? Because I didn't know at the time when I wrote the story. I said, well, there's a backstory here. So what I came up with is that he was kind of their father figure.
Yeah.
And you can see as the stories have progressed that he's in with the boys, and even a couple where the boys are not in where he's in the story, he's always thinking about them.
Yeah.
He knows that he's become a father figure to them. So that was really cool, and that helped ground the boys. That kind of helped flesh out the boys a little bit because they
And
needed some sort of male guidance.
well, when he relates with the boys, sometimes some of his secret background comes out just in what he says,
Right.
like situational awareness,
Yeah.
and always just how he talks and how he talks to them.
Yeah.
And even though they are free spirited, when it comes to Ivan, it is yes sir and no sir,
That's right. They show
and
respect.
very respectful. And I think it's just because he's got about so many scrapes, and they've also worked together
Mm-hmm.
in so many things just by stuff the boys have discovered.
Mm-hmm.
And even when Professor Greaves took him out, Ivan was ready to do some damage.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's cool, man. I
Right.
like that.
So, so that was one of the first characters that you ever drew,
Yep,
if I remember correctly.
it
So
was. Yeah.
you had sent me a couple of sketches, and then I thought, well, this will be fun. Again, we were still trying to figure out, you know, how are you gonna fit into Nevermore Hollows? I knew that you had a role beyond just art. I knew that, and I was
Hmm.
shocked. Well, how do we make this happen, and what's his role? And so I remember saying, well, let me tell you a little bit, and it might have even been you asked me about some of his backstory because you originally sketched him out, and then I started telling you who Ivan
Yeah.
is, and we don't want to give it away. We want to give
Oh
we want to
no.
give the leader, because I want it to be a big reveal. When
Oh
it
yeah.
happens, I want it to be a big reveal. But I will give you this. So everybody who's listening and watching, okay? So after I realized that his name was Ivan Ivanovich, and I started,
Yeah.
his backstory came quick. It came real quick to me,
Yeah.
and I'll tell you this: it it comes from my love of true history and sci-fi.
Hmm.
It comes from my true history of the space race.
Yeah.
And when you went back after I told you who he was, you went back and added things into that piece of art.
Oh,
And
I did. Yeah.
I think we need to post that piece of art when this comes out because there
Yeah.
are clues in that piece of art of who Ivan Ivanovich is.
And I just I like that he doesn't want any recognition. He doesn't want any. He's a custodian in a weird little trailer park, and but it's just like my favorite. One of my favorite things is that he's converted the golf cart
Yeah,
with a high powered engine. You
right.
know, um, and I just have and there's been several times when they've used that,
Mhm.
which just makes me laugh. But
And that fact that it's pink and white,
yeah,
and
you know,
from because the pink flamingos, the colors are pink and white and teal, and somehow he's this, Clint Eastwood style character who
right.
has ended up with this extremely feminine thing, but he just owns it.
Oh
The only
yeah,
thing that he changed, he could have painted it, but no. All he needed, he knew that what it needed was a better engine, so he could deal with the crap that was getting done that
I
was
think
happening in the Pink
right.
Flamingos trailer park.
I think in Ivan's mind, it's property of the trailer park,
Yeah,
so he can only modify it so far.
right.
You know,
And
and
and we
you know,
and I pulled a little bit too from the guys like our dads,
yeah.
and our granddads. Those dudes, most of those guys back in the day, they spoke little, but they knew how to
Mhm.
do anything.
Oh yeah,
Anything. My
you know,
dad, my dad had a ninth grade education, okay?
right.
But if the space shuttle, our joke in the family was if the space shuttle had crashed in our yard, he could have put it back together and had them back up into space in a short enough
Oh yeah.
time.
my dad can look like he has built additions to the house,
Hmm.
and he can sit there, just stand there and look at it and go, okay, I'm going to put this here. He never has plans. He builds it
Right.
all in his head,
Yeah.
and then he builds it.
But
And
that's who Ivan is. He's a throwback to a yesteryear when the men could do anything. My dad
yeah,
was the same way. I saw my dad build a house. Again, ninth grade education. I saw
right.
him build a house. He was always working on cars. I remember
Yep.
one time for extra money, this guy says, "Hey Sam, you think you can throw a coat of paint on my '68 Camaro?" And my dad went, "Yep." My dad had never painted a car before in his life. He said, "Yeah, I do it." And he did it. And he ended up, that became a decent little side income there for a
Yeah.
while because he was just painting everybody's hot rod because they were coming down. But what he did is he built. Now, at one point, he worked for John Deere.
Yeah.
So he was a mechanic for John Deere for a while. So after hours, he would drive the car into their paint shop and paint it. But then when he stopped working there, he just built this little thing out in the backyard and he just put up some plastic and he would drive
Uh-huh.
the car in there and he'd just paint away.
But it's guys who they did it out of necessity. They didn't
Yes.
brag.
Nope.
There's nothing. It's just they just, well, yeah, I can do that,
Yeah.
and then they did it. And it's cool that there are still guys out there like that. I know
Right.
some. I can do it to an extent.
Right. Well, and see,
Uh,
that's me. But I got my, there's a famous quote. I heard it, years ago, but I'd already learned this from my dad. And I think it's one of the, which president was it? One of the Roosevelts. I think it was Teddy that somebody said, if someone asks you, do you know how to do something? You say, yes, I do. And then you set about learning how to do it.
yeah.
That was our dad's, dude. And that's
Oh,
Ivan
definitely.
Ivanovich. Whatever you need, he's going to go, okay, I'm going to do it. And then he's going to
Yeah.
set about learning how to do it if he doesn't already know, and he's going
And
to
he ain't
figure it
gonna
out.
ask for help.
No, no. So when we get into Ivan, so now you see where we pulled from Ivan.
Right.
He's just that call back to yesteryear. And so let's talk about his age.
Well, Ivan is. We really don't know how old Ivan is. He
Yeah,
looks to be about 50,
right.
but as far as how old he really is, who knows?
Right. We could guess once you know who he is. Once you do know who he is, you can
Yeah.
go, oh, okay, he's got to be roughly this age. But we've said this before. He is older than he appears, but
Oh
how
yeah.
much older? How much older?
Well, when we finally reveal who he is and how old he is, you're gonna go, what?
Right.
You know.
And
Um.
to me, I know we've built it up, and I hope that when I finally get to tell that story, and you help me flesh it out and get it out there, I hope people go, dude, that was worth the wait because I
Oh
think it's
yeah.
just cool. I think it's really cool. And then you and I have talked a lot about how did he end up in Nevermore Hollows. So something happened to
Yeah.
him years ago, and he ended up with Lafayette and Lafayette's
Right.
son, and whatever happened there, which we're going to ultimately tell that story. Then he and Lafayette end up in Nevermore Hollows at roughly the same time.
Right.
So Ivan, of course, Ivan needs to, lay low just like Lafayette. Well, Lafayette goes to ground in the bunker, and Ivan changes his name because it wasn't Ivan, wasn't
No.
Ivan Ivanovich because that's John Doe, right?
Right.
And so he comes to and he changes his name to Ivan Ivanovich, and he just melts away into the Pink Flamingos trailer park noise there of all the
Yeah. Well, I
riffraff.
mean, who's gonna look for anybody in this weird little town in Georgia?
Right,
You
right.
know.
So he also um, I'm going to go ahead and say this. He is ex-military. I think
Yes,
there's
he is.
enough out there to let you know he is ex-military, which clearly is a defining character trait.
All right.
Um, and so from there, is there anything that you think that you want to kind of let people know about just the how we built that character and what do we see his role? So that's a good one. What is his role now in Nevermore Hollows?